you have just published a piece recently on the murder rate at mid-year here. We wrote about it over at The Reload because what you found was pretty interesting. What is the situation looking like now halfway through 2023?
So there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide, and they all report data in different formats. Some don't report at all. They report data, some publicly on their websites. Most report it to the FBI. And so what we found is that if you get a collection of agencies, a sample of, generally 25, 50, 75, or 100 of the largest agencies, you can kind of predict what the national trend is and what is happening nationwide. And even through this point in mid-July right now, it's generally predictive of where we're going to be at the end of the year. Something like 2020 can happen and as the months go on, you're seeing the change. But generally in normal years, if you have enough cities of data and you've got late enough in the year, you can predict what's going to happen when the FBI data comes out. The FBI is not going to release their data until, for 2023, until 9 or 10 months after the fact. So we're not going to have 2023 data until September, October of 2024. So using a sample, we're able to accurately understand the trend without seeing it precisely. And so what we have is we have 104 cities right now. We added our 104th city today. And the data for those cities shows about an 11% decline this year relative to last year. If you historically look at the data, you can see that big cities tend to overstate the national trend. So if murder is up 6% in big cities, you would expect maybe murder's up 3% nationally. If it's down 8% in big cities, you'd expect maybe it's down 5 or 6% nationally. And so if it's down 11% in our big city sample, that is suggestive of somewhere in the 8 to 10% range decline nationally, which it doesn't sound that impressive, but murder tends to go up or down by a couple of percentage points.
Right. So 10% would be a pretty tremendous change.
It would be the largest change ever recorded. The largest previous percent decline would be 9% in 1996. And it would also, if we have a double-digit decline in murder this year, it would be the first time that we ever had 2,000 fewer murders from one year to the next. So it's not just that we have fewer murders now, it's that we're having a substantial decline in murder. Even if it doesn't exceed 1996, it's still a substantial decline after what was in 2020, the largest one-year increase ever recorded.
Wow. Yeah, so that's pretty remarkable what you're finding at this point in time. It's certainly not an insignificant change. You're talking about a really substantial downturn in murder in the United States from what we're seeing in the sample so far. Yeah,
and it's the third quarter. I mean, we're not talking about it being, running out the clock and being in victory formation or anything like that. So things could still change. We do have a big city sample, and so it's possible that our big city sample is more overstating than typical the national trend, but it looks like we're going to see a decline no matter what. A large decline is most likely in the cards. But I should note that even a 10% decline this year would still leave us 30 or so percent above 2014's low. It would still leave us substantially above 2019 before we had the 2020 surge. And so we're still talking about way too many murders in America. And we're also seeing places like Cleveland, DC, Memphis, Kansas City, where the national trend is seeing a decline, but these cities are seeing, in some cases, big increases. And so it's yes, nationally we're seeing a decline, but it's 2/3 or 70% of our sample. It's not every city. And I think that those are important caveats to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's not an across the board decline necessarily. So how does that even out? Are you seeing major declines in some cities? Are you seeing declines in most cities? And then there's a couple outliers like DC and the other cities you mentioned. How does it break out in the data?
So in most cities, I think only 31 of the 104 cities are having an increase this year so far. There have been pretty substantial declines in a number of places. New Orleans, where I am, murder's down 20%. And that comes after last year, where New Orleans had the highest murder rate the city had achieved since before Katrina. Buffalo, New York, murder's down 60%. There were 42 murders in Buffalo, including the horrendous mass shooting in the supermarket in 2022 through June. This year, they're at 16. Chicago has seen a steady 10% decline. And if you include that on top of last year, where Chicago also saw a 10% decline, it's a 20% 2-year decline, which is pretty significant for Chicago. New York, murders down 10%, but shootings are down 25%. Philadelphia, murders down, I think, close to 30%. Jackson, Mississippi, which also had probably the highest murder rate of any city, over 150,000 last year, is seeing a big decline. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which also saw a big increase. Minneapolis, Milwaukee, all seeing big decreases. So in any sample where you're seeing, you're not going to see uniform declines. Even in 2020, only 80% of our sample, big city sample, saw an increase. So there was still 20% of our sample that had a decrease in murder, despite the historic increase in 2020. There are a lot more examples of cities that are seeing big decreases than are cities that are seeing big increases.